This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Ken ISAACS. So he's the Vice President of Programs and Government Relations at Samaritan's Purse, and he's under the leadership of Billy Graham's son, Franklin. So Isaac has spent more than 35 years working in relief and development of different communities. His work has taken him to nearly 150 countries in response to global emergencies resulting from wars, complex crises, famines, and natural disasters. I'm reading this straight off of his bio here. ISAACS has served on the ground in response to foreign disasters and aid projects. He has directed major relief operations around the world since 1991, including Samaritan's Purse's work in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. ISAACS also coordinated relief efforts in Liberia during the Ebola crisis, following massive earthquakes in China and Haiti, and following the devastating cyclones that hit Myanmar and the Philippines. In addition, he designed and implemented emergency relief programs in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Bosnia, Cambodia, Honduras, El Salvador, Kosovo, Turkey, Afghanistan, Nepal, Haiti, Japan, and the Philippines. And he's also the author of the new book. This was kind of the scaffolding of our discussion today. It's right here, Running to the Fire, Helping in Jesus' Name. And I'll just tell you this right from the beginning. This is one of the most impactful interviews that we've done in a while, because obviously reading the book, kind of seeing some of the stories, I had a feeling that we would get some crazy stories today, but he told a bunch of stories that were not in this book. Because we got into, okay, how'd you get, over to Africa for the first time? How'd you meet Franklin Graham? How did you decide you were going to do this? And it was kind of interesting how, Jesus led him and then Jesus led his wife, and it wasn't always like super copacetic there for a while. But we talked about, how Samaritan's Purse and how he responds to different things that are happening around the globe that come mainly because of human darkness. Now, obviously, there's the darkness of sin that comes from natural disasters and things like that, but also the evil of the human heart. But he's lived in communist countries, and I asked him about communism and how does he feel about communism and how, the younger generations are warming to communism, even though they've never actually experienced it up close. Talked about his work in Afghanistan and Bosnia, but then we spent a lot of time talking about Rwanda. Because here's the thing, for most people, for me included, that genocide happened in, 93, 94. And I was just too young to really know what was going on. You're not following the news. Like, you watch Hotel Rwanda, and that's kind of the closest you get to something like that. But he spent quite a bit of time talking about what he experienced firsthand. And it is absolutely, like, some of the stories are just absolutely overwhelming, right? And we moved from Rwanda to talking about a time when he was detained and interrogated while he was in Zaire. That was right after the Rwandan genocide. And so, we talked about some other topics as well, the crisis right now of Muslims slaughtering Christians all over Africa, to include Nigeria and Mozambique and Sudan. And then we talked a little bit about what he's going to be doing next. But like I said, one of the most impactful interviews that we've done in a while, just a lot of very powerful stories. It's very overwhelming at times, but I think it's very, very important for everybody to be listening. So without further ado, let's get into it. Ken ISAACS, welcome to the show, but I just got to tell you, normally I'm happy with my setup and how things look here on my end, but you're just showing off now. You got the coolest background maybe in the history of the podcast. Why you got to flex on me on my own show?
Well, you know what? I went easy on you because we did it in the after sunset. So you only get to see the lights, but if it had been in the daytime, you would be looking at the temple back there.
That's right. So tell everybody where you are. What are you doing?
I'm in Jerusalem. I'm in Jerusalem overlooking this old city of Jerusalem right here.
Very good. So what are you doing there right now in Jerusalem? Because we're recording this, guys, just a peek behind the curtain. We're recording this in November of 25. And so this is, a few weeks after the, kind of tenuous ceasefire between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces. So what are you doing there now?
Well, I work for Samaritan's Purse, and we have been here for 2 years, since probably about October the 10th, after October the 7th of 2023. And we've been helping people affected by the conflict. The majority of the work that we've done has been inside of Israel. We set out with a strategy to help everybody that in all the kibbutz around the Gaza pocket, and also up in the north next to Lebanon and Syria, where attacks have been. And we're looking for a way to get into Gaza. We've been helping there through partners, but maybe with this peace agreement, there's something we could do more in a major way. So I'm here looking at that and talking to a lot of people.
Okay, very good. And that's really been kind of the status of your entire career, because I don't want to talk too much more about the conflict, because by the time this comes out, who the heck knows what's going to happen? It feels like the news cycle changes every 72 hours as it pertains to Gaza. But you're on the show today because we're going to be going over your new book that you released. So it's called Running into the Fire, Helping in Jesus' Name. This was released in 2025. And so this is really, there's a quote that I feel like provides kind of a good scaffolding to build off from, because we got a lot of stories that we're going to cover today. But here's a quote from the book. I hold no degrees and had no special training to equip me to live the life that I have experienced. Yet when I read my Bible, I realize that puts me in some good company. So, Ken, why this book? Why now? Why you?
Well, there's so many answers in that question, but I wanted to tell the story of what God has done in my life. And I felt called to the world. My wife thought I was crazy. And that was back when I was younger than you. I was 34, 33. And but I prayed. I didn't know what else to do, so I just prayed. And essentially my prayer was, God, if you'll open a door, I'll go through it. Small town North Carolina guy, high school education. I had that, and I was glad that I did. And I was in a family well drilling business. It's hard work, manual labor. And so I just prayed, God, open a door and I'll go through it. And, he did open a door, but it wasn't this door. This wasn't the door that I was thinking of, where I would be here with Jerusalem at my back and having traveled to, 150 countries and been in 20 wars and seen 4 genocides and all of this stuff. It's like, I couldn't imagine that. And I didn't want that story at my age. All of us know we're going to die. We just don't think it's going to happen to us. And I didn't want that story to pass. And I wanted people to be inspired. And I also want them not to be afraid to step out in faith and trust God, because he's worthy.
When I think the thing you talk about with training, there's so many people that are like, oh, well, I'm not equipped to do this thing. But the thing that they're referring to is something that they just have to step into. And you're right, whenever you read the stories of the Bible, because there's the grand overall story of the Bible, which is the gospel, but then there's the stories of the Bible, which is essentially person after person after person that was not trained for the thing that they ended up doing. Because like if God picked the fastest person on earth to run the fastest race, then everyone's like, well, yeah, that's already the fastest person on earth. But if God takes somebody that's not the fastest person on earth already and turns him into that, then to God be the glory. Because even all the crowns that we're going to be gathering for the afterlife are going to be laid down at Christ's feet anyway. Amen. And so that's ultimately where we're at. But I mean, you mentioned kind of this blue collar upbringing. And I think even in the book, you called it like a blue collar calling. And during your blue collar calling, looking in the mid 80s or so, you actually met very fortuitously, you met Franklin Graham. And so let's talk a little bit about first meeting the son of the great Billy Graham.
Well, I had seen him in Boone, North Carolina, where I live. And I knew who he was because he looked just like his father, And I remember meeting him at a sandwich shop, not meeting him, but seeing him at Pepper's. And I thought, well, that's got to be Billy Graham's son. And years later, I was at a rental store with my brother going to get a U-Haul. And when I came into the store, the guy, his name was Harris, said, hey, Ken, I was at church the other night, and there was some missionary there, and he was talking about well drillers in Africa. And if you wanted to go, I would help you. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, I just came in here to get a U-Haul. And I said, okay, thanks. And I went on back in the back of the store. In a few minutes, this man came in and he had Franklin with him. And he introduced Franklin to me. And he said, Franklin, I was just encouraging Ken to go to Africa. He's a well driller and he could help some of those missionaries or something. And Franklin went, yes, you should go. He's a very Cheshire kind of a grin on his face. But, little did I know, that was in 1984. But little did I know that we would drill a well at Franklin's house in 1986. And I gave him a card as we were leaving. And I said, if something came up about water in Africa and you needed some advice, let me know. He called me a year and a half later, 14, 15 months later, called me. He had kept that card and he had gotten a request from a church in Ethiopia. And they wanted, they had a long list of expensive equipment. They wanted to drill wells. So his question to me was, when I came and talked to him, is this list of equipment what they need to drill wells? And that started a lot of questions and conversations, and it also started me examining scriptures, particularly when God called Moses and when God called Jonah. And I studied those, and it's like I started fearing, if God's calling me and I don't want to draw the wrath of God. And so anyway, that's a bit of how I got to it. And it ended up, my family and I moved to Ethiopia. We stayed there for 3 years. There were 2 wars going on at the same time, a little factoid that I missed in my early assessments. But we learned a lot.
Well, the thing that you talked about in the book is that, you mentioned the Cheshire, smile on his face, but Franklin, I guess, even in your early communication had just a very matter-of-fact type of way of communicating with you. And you even mentioned in the book that in a very matter-of-fact kind of way that he told you that he didn't believe that you and him were brought together by accident. Okay, now it's one thing to say that to somebody, and, that could be a really good sales technique, right? Especially in the Christian space, because it's like, God led me to this. It's like, did he? But he very much so felt like, and I think the last 40 years of work that y'all, 40 years plus, I guess, of work y'all have done together have kind of proven that. But going back to that time, did you think, this is just, a neat guy that I'm meeting that I may do a little bit of work for, but he's not going to really have a direct impact on the rest of my life? Or did you kind of feel the same sense that he did, that no, there was a reason, a monumental kind of cosmic reason why you two were brought together?
I didn't feel the profoundness of it till I came back from the 1-month assessment that I did in Ethiopia. I started feeling it profoundly. There was a period of time, Kyle, where I was praying. I did do the 1-month missionary volunteer trip, and that was in March of '85. And when I came back home, that's when I feel like God was calling me to the world. And my wife, are you losing your mind? And she was serious. We got 2 kids, same county, we haven't, we're small town guys. And when Franklin called and asked me to come and talk to him, it was 16, 17 months later, I had gotten no answer for what I had been praying. And I had always been taught, when you pray, you get an answer. You get a yes or you get a no. And I thought nothing meant no. So I stopped praying and my mind moved on. I stepped out of the family business and I took a job drilling environmental holes down in South Carolina, which was interesting and sort of challenging to me. And then one weekend I came, and this was straining in my family relationship between my wife and I. And, going away for a week and coming back home on the weekends. And I got a call on the weekend, and Franklin asked me to come and talk to him. I did. That went on, that conversation, for 3 or 4 months. And I said, Franklin, we're not going to get answers to these questions unless somebody who knows what they're doing goes to Ethiopia. And he said, would you go? I said, well, I don't know. I'd have to check with my boss. But Kyle, the important thing is that at this point in time, I had prayed so long for something that now when it's in my face, I wasn't making the connection that it was the thing I had been praying for. I didn't make that connection. I went to Ethiopia, and in my mind, it was very easy. It's logical. Well drilling is a logical thing. As guys, you got a leak, you got to fix it. Your pipe smashed, you fix it. Get a bigger hammer, get a bigger shovel, put more horsepower behind it. Like I understood all of that, running heavy equipment. But I went, I asked the basic questions. I made a list of the equipment that was needed. I called some vendors. I got the prices. I just organized it, and I gave it paper to him when I'm back. He looks at it, and for maybe 40 seconds, he's looking at it like this, and he looked up, and he just said, matter-of-factly, but it was profound, he said, Kenny, I do not think it is an accident that you and I have been brought together. And the reason that carries so much gravity today is because there's certainly in my life and my career, there have been times of suffering and times of grief and worry and whatever. And he'll look at me and he'll say, do you remember in the office when I told you it wasn't an accident? And that sort of brings it into focus to me that God's design is in this, and I got to trust him.
Ken, you're hitting on something that's really, really important. It's that, and really, ultimately, this is a largely male audience. A lot of men don't have an anchor point, right? They don't have something that they can tether themselves to, whether it's a verse or a statement or an occurrence or something that happens. But it's good to kind of always have that with you. Because like for me with Undaunted.Life, I mean, we're on the tip of the spear with the stuff that we do. And y'all are certainly in the same way with Samaritan's Purse. You're constantly getting flaming arrows shot your way. And if they don't hit you, they hit somebody around you. This could be a family member, a loved one, a close confidant or something like that. And that's what I tell people that help me out or work with anything on Undaunted.Life. It's like, dude, just expect things to start going poorly, right? And that's it's because you're in the game now, you're in the fight, and so things are going to start going. But if you don't have a tether point of this is why I'm here. Like I was put on this planet to equip men to push back darkness. And so if I'm doing something that doesn't lead to that end, then it's not something that I should probably be doing with my time. And the same thing with you. You can always kind of go back and tether yourself to that. And that's not the only anchor point that you have for your life, but obviously for the work that you're doing with Samaritan's Purse, it's very, very important. But real quick, I thought it was kind of funny. You mentioned in the book how you kind of quit your job without telling your wife, and then a little while later, your wife quit her job without telling you. So y'all kind of did a little, your own little personal tete-a-tete. So what happened there?
Well, when I came back from Ethiopia, Franklin said, I'd like for you to go and do this program. And it was right after he said, we've been brought together. It's not by accident. He said, I'd like for you, would you pray about going to Ethiopia? At this point in my life, I had moved on mentally and spiritually from the call of the world. And I went, yeah, sure, I'll pray about it. And I left. I'm in South Carolina. Franklin is persistent. He's tenacious. And he'd call me a couple of times a week. And he'd say, are you praying? I'd say, yeah, I'm praying. Well, what's God telling you? I don't know. He's not telling me nothing yet. And I'd go back to work. But he kept on. And this went on probably 4 or 5 weeks. I started talking to my wife about it. And she's like, there's no way in hell I'm going to Africa. It ain't never happening. Okay, well, all right, if that's, gee, honey, I don't know. But he called me one Friday, and I had gotten to the point where I gave him a sincere word, I will pray about it. And I went to the scriptures of Moses and about Jonah, and God started working in my heart. Once I opened myself up to God's word, and stopped having whatever earthly shield that I was carrying around. And then he called me on a Friday and he said, are you praying about it? And I said, yeah, I am praying about it. He said, what do you think God's calling you to do? I said, well, I feel like he's calling me to go, but he's not calling my wife. And I don't feel like that he would call me unless he called my wife. So I'm making a mistake. He said, that's not what I ask you. What I ask you is, what do you think God is calling you to do? Can I pray for you? And I said, yeah. And in that 15 or 20-second prayer, I felt a peace come inside of me. And I heard, trust me. And when Franklin said amen, I said, I'll be there in 2 weeks. And I walked right outside the door and I gave my notice. My boss, after he got through screaming at me, he said, you better fly home this weekend. And I did. I flew from Aiken, South Carolina to Hickory, North Carolina. My wife picked me up at the airport. And I told her that I had given my notice and I was going to go to work Samaritan's Purse in 2 weeks. I was going to go to Africa. We were married 46 and a half years before God took her home. She didn't talk to me for 3 days. She didn't say boo. She didn't say nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
She acted like I was like I was non-existent. And then what happened with her, I came to work on August 11th, 1988 at Samaritan's Purse. I was the 22nd person in devotions. That's what I counted that day. And she's like, I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going. I'm not going to Africa. Franklin said to her, he talked to her. This is sort of a funny story. But he said, would you bring Carolyn here and let me talk to her? And I said, she doesn't want to talk to you. But I got her up there. So she sits down and she goes, I hear you want to talk to me? And he said, yeah. And he's never at a loss for words.
Yeah.
She said, all right, what do you want to say? Well, Kenny needs to go to London, and he needs to go down to Nairobi, and he can stop back by in Addis, and it'd be good for you to go see it and all of this. She just looked at him. He finishes, and she says, is that all? And he said, yeah, that's all. She got up and walked out. And she ended up taking that trip, and she came back as we took off, leaving Addis Ababa, coming back. She leaned right over in my nose, finger on my nose, literally. And she said, I'm never coming back. And people started praying for her. I was praying for her. I didn't know what was going to happen in our relationship and, going over and coming back. And, it was going to be tough. And she was an accountant. And one day in July of '88, we met up at my mom's after work. We would have coleslaw, or mom had potato salad or something, Carolyn came in, and my mother says, hey, honey, how are you doing today? Carolyn said, I'm fine. Well, what'd you do? Carolyn said, I gave my notice today, and I was right here with coleslaw.
Mid-bite.
Yeah. And my mother didn't miss a beat. She said, oh, really? What are you going to do? She said, God's telling me to go to Ethiopia with Kenny. And that's how I found out. So we both quit and then told the other one. And then we started coming together. God shaped us together for an experience that changed our entire world.
That's such a cool story because, I talk to a lot of guys that are early in their marriage, and some of them are really struggling with their wives. Some of them are personally struggling, and their wives are the ones heavily praying for them. And it's just, my pastor buddy, Joby Martin, said this. He's like, I don't know what to tell people that are married that aren't Christians, because it's not that you can't be married and not be Christian, right? Like, you can be a non-Christian and be married. Like, that's a thing. But he's like, if y'all aren't seeking God individually, like in a triangular, here's you, here's her, and you're both seeking God at the same time, that's how you become closer. Because he's like, everything else, and this makes total sense, and Gary Thomas would echo this, and, a lot of counselors, if you're not seeking God individually, like, everything you're learning is tips and tricks. It's communication tips and tricks. It's money tips and tricks. It's, how to, parent your kids tips and tricks. But he's like, it's not ultimately bringing you closer together in a holy matrimony or in a covenant before a holy and just God, right? So I think a story like that is going to be helpful for guys, obviously, because y'all were married, for decades and decades and decades. One thing, Ken, before we get into all these individual stories about individual places that you went, you mentioned very briefly in your book about personally living under communism. So this is something that you experienced kind of early in your work. And we live in a time right now where major cities in the United States are electing open communists to be their mayors, for instance. And you have a bunch of, young doofuses that are not really experienced in the world. They don't know anything about the gulags from the Soviet Union. They don't know anything about what happened in Pol Pot's Cambodia. They don't know anything about what happened in any of these places. But they look at some of the nicer sounding tenets of communism and they go, oh, well, if communism is just done correctly, then it's going to be a utopia on this planet. And so they're like romanced by the beautiful sounding words of communism without dealing with the actual realities of what it looks like on the ground. But most of us, Ken, and most of the people in your audience have never lived in a communist country. They've never lived under the boot of communism, but you have. So what's your read of kind of what that was like, and then fast forward to today where so many people seem to be interested in it as an actual worldview?
It amazes me how short the memory of the world is. And
Amen.
I've heard this story so many times. Pol Pot just didn't do it correctly.
Right, yeah.
Stalin didn't do it correctly. Everywhere that communism has taken root and been utilized, there is a trail of blood and suffering behind it. And when I look at communism, and I see collective and I see individual. And the way I see God made us, we're individuals. We have individual rights. And I don't want to give my authority and the authority over my life to a state. No communist experiment has worked. It may still be existing in a few places. That would be like, I don't know, Cuba, like North Korea. I've been in North Korea. That's horrible. That is crazy. I went to the Soviet Union, and the last 3 months of 1991 and the first 3 months of 92, I was there and watched it transition from being the Soviet Empire to being a broke, crumbled country where people lost faith in the thing that they had built their entire lives around, and that was the communist state. I believe that these elections that have recently happened today, where communist people have been put into office in the United States, the citizens will come to regret those votes. They will not like it. I have nothing good to say about communism. It is brutal. The first people I ever saw killed in front of my eyes was in a communist state. There's no value in life. There's no freedom. There was nothing. It's horrible. It's horrible.
Well, it's horrible and it's detestable, but you're right. There's a historical ignorance, because I talk a lot that even within Christendom, there's a biblical illiteracy that is so unbelievably high that it just beggars imagination. But that's how you can have so many people that are self-described evangelicals will also say, oh yeah, there's multiple ways to God, not just Jesus and all that. It's because they don't read their Bibles. And so that's how you come away with those types of things. But when you don't read a holistic history of a worldview, then you can come away thinking that it's going to be fine. And that's the thing. The people that rise to power in these communist states, they obviously don't want you to learn about Pol Pot's Cambodia or Stalin or Lenin's Soviet Union. They don't want you to learn about any of the things that happened in Cuba or any things that are still happening in these different states. It's just easier to kind of put those in the faraway machine. Like, we're just going to memory hold those things because look at me, I've got a nice smile and I say a bunch of things. And guess what? You're going to get it all for free, as if free is actually a real thing. But I want to get in specifically to talking about your work that you did in Afghanistan. And so I want to read a quote here from the book. In so many places around the world, I have witnessed wolves horribly ravaging lambs, and I certainly understand what it feels like to walk into a room, such as in the home of an Afghan warlord, knowing I am being sent in as a lamb. But that is exactly what I have been able to experience, the triumph of the Lion of Judah, who is forever worthy. And so let's talk a little bit about your experience and your time in the country of Afghanistan.
I went to Afghanistan the first time in July of 1991. I was there for 3 or 4 days, 5 days. And there was no peacekeeping forces. There was nothing. The warlords were fighting each other. And so it's just me and a few guys in a vehicle driving in. And it was something that moved me, and I felt a call there. In fact, I called Franklin when I got back to Pakistan. And I said, I think we ought to do something in Afghanistan. We were a new organization just getting started, and he said, not yet. And then after 9/11, he called me. I was up in New York City working at Ground Zero, and he said, you remember when you called me 10 years ago, and you said you want to go to Afghanistan, and I told you now's not the time? I said, yeah. He said, well, now is the time. So I made my way to Afghanistan. I took a team of people that I had assembled, friends that were still breathing and willing to go. We didn't have all the structure that we had now. And I instinctively knew that I needed to get to the upper echelon of whoever controlled all those people with guns. So I go to this house. The man's name was General Muhammad Atta, and he was head of the Northern Alliance. And when I got to his house, he had, 6 or 8 tanks in the yard and about 500 guys. And I've always been a gun guy. And so the guns don't intimidate me, but I had never been around anybody's house that had tanks in the yard. And but it says something about a situation if a man's got a tank in his yard. And so got an appointment, went in. I'm in the foyer, which is sort of a palatial red carpet on the floor. We're sitting on the floor. And there's 2 American guys in there with uniforms, and they had big aluminum suitcases. And I said hi to them. They didn't even speak. They wouldn't speak to me at all. And so the door opened. They called me in, and I go in and I meet with General Muhammad Atta. And the way they work the chairs in Afghanistan is like big throne around the wall and the open area in the middle. So he's sitting in his throne. And I introduced myself. And, God gave me an Afghan Christian interpreter. He came out of Rick Warren's church and called me. And he said, I heard that you're going to go to Afghanistan. Could I carry your bag? And I said, why don't you get a ticket and come and see me in North Carolina? And he did, and I took him with me. And he had quite a story, but it was, you need a trusted interpreter. But I told him, I said, listen, told him my name of our organization. And I said, we're a Christian organization. This is what we can do. We can help build schools. We can drill wells. We can give medicine. We can educate the women. We'll work with your communities. And he said, that's good. We need it. You come. And I said, General, I want you to understand we're followers of Christ. And if that's a problem, and I put my hands up like this, I said, please tell me and I'll leave right now because I don't want to make any problems for you. And he looked at me and he said, it's not a problem. You're welcome. And I didn't understand his code of behavior and honor at the time. But at that moment, he extended an umbrella of coverage, of protection to us through his guarantee. And, we left there in 2007. There were a couple of ladies from Texas that were executed on their bicycles. And that was a sign to me that things are going to deteriorate here. But when we left, there were over 500 people in underground churches. And a lot of times people ask us, well, what's your evangelism strategy? Well, my evangelism strategy is to be faithful, to get there, to help people in Jesus' name and help them out of the ditches of life. And I have always seen that if you stick to those kind of biblical principles, God has a strategy that's way beyond any strategy that I could ever imagine. And in the fact that I'm doing what I do, and also in the fact that he led people to himself right there in Afghanistan.
Hey guys, real quick. I know a lot of you train for very specific things. So maybe you've got a mud race coming up, a mountain hunt, a 5K, or maybe you just want to keep up with your kids or you just don't want to let the old man in. But for a lot of you guys, whether you're working out at the Globo gym or even your garage gym, you get there and you just don't know exactly what to do. And so you just kind of settle for the same old workout routine, maybe some bench press, bicep curls, a walk on the treadmill, and you know you're not really getting the most out of your workout plan. And I want you guys to stop wasting time at the gym. No more settling. It's time for you guys to get a guide to help you reach your fitness goals. And that's why I want to remind you about my good friends at Mountain Tough. Mountain Tough is a fitness and mental toughness app developed by military special operators and mountain hunters that's becoming a global movement for building mentally tough athletes on and off the mountain. Mountain Tough is a native app ready to be downloaded on all platforms, so that includes iPhone, Android, Apple TV, Roku, and there's more. Once you sign up and download the app or access the website, you immediately have access to hundreds of exercise programs and literally thousands of workout videos, thousands. So that includes structured hybrid strength and endurance programs, daily workouts, the full exercise library, mental toughness training, the Mountain Tough community, and accountability. And you can use it all on the go, online or offline, no matter where you decide to train. So if you're just getting started, that's great. They have programs for beginners. If you have minimal or no gear where you train, that's not a factor. They have minimal gear and body weight programs. And guys, if you're wanting to get into or maintain elite level fitness, they've got you covered with programs for top tier athletes too. And for a limited time, Mountain Tough is extending Undaunted Lifers like you an incredible offer. Go to mountaintough.com. That's MTNtough.com and enter the code Kyle when you sign up for a monthly plan to receive your first month free after your 14-day trial. So that's 6 weeks free to make sure this is for you. I'm sure it will be. That is 6 weeks free on the best-in-class physical and mental training app in the world. So stop wasting time. It's time to get real fitness results. Let my friends at Mountain Tough guide the way. Again, go to MTNtough. That's mountaintough.com, promo code Kyle. I think that's important as well because sometimes your evangelism strategy just has to be putting your yes on the table and then now asking the Lord, so what do you want? Right? And so some of us time it's like, okay, get out of your own way, get out of your own, strictures for comfort or safety, and then just say, yes, Lord, and then let him direct your steps thereafter. And so obviously we're going to be bouncing around timeline wise from different countries, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Bosnia. And so again, I was born in 1986. And so the ethnic cleansing that went on there, in the early to mid 1990s, that just wasn't part of my plausibility structure because I wasn't exposed to any of that news, right, when I'm in elementary school. And so a lot of people that are my age don't really know anything about what happened. And that's not really something that's brought up in modern day discussions either. Like some people have never even heard of Bosnia, but there's a very interesting quote from your book. It's this: The Bosnian conflict was the first time I became emotionally attached to the people, not a particular side, but the people as a whole. So if you would kind of give maybe even a 30,000-foot overview of what happened in Bosnia during that time period, but then specifically for you, Ken, what was it about that experience that got you so emotionally involved?
Bosnia is one of a number of countries that made up the Yugoslavian Republic. And Yugoslavia was aligned with the East, with the Soviet Union, although they maintained some relationship with the West. And the country broke up. This was in 1991, and it started in the northern part of the country, and then it came down to Croatia and finally into Bosnia. So we started helping there in it was Slovakia. Slovenia was the first country. And we started helping in Croatia, and then the war quickly spread down into Bosnia. And many of your listeners may not know this, but Sarajevo was the home of the Winter Olympics, I think in 1984 or 1985. I don't remember the exact year. So it had this sort of beautiful charm that you saw in, American sports or whatever. And but it was also at that time when the country broke up, the fourth largest army in the world. So each one of those little nations were well armed. And the Serbs, I could say, were the dominant group, and they didn't want anyone to leave. They wanted to control. So it was the Serbs making war in Croatia and the Serbs making war in Bosnia. And I started traveling in and out of Bosnia in humanitarian convoys that we put together. And I met a lot of people there. I was associating with Christians out of Croatia. We were trying to help the people that are victims of the war. And there were a lot of nights of staying in buildings when shelling was going on, a lot of people getting hit by snipers right around you, grenades going off. There's a lot of death. The place was a mess. It was a hard war. And I just, for the first time, started connecting one-on-one with the suffering that the people were going through. And I remember a neurosurgeon who is still a friend today, his wife, he was a Croatian, his wife was a Serbian, and I can't understand this. She went back to be with her people in Serbia. And all of the ancient hatreds were reignited. And this happened with many families. And he was living with a Croatian woman in Slovenia. He's not a young guy, the guy's probably 75 now. And but I used to stop when I would come through Sarajevo, and I'd bring him a bag of orange, a little piece of ham, carton of cigarettes, and a bottle to drink, and I would stay with him. And but I just sat around enough campfires and spent enough time in enough people's homes. I heard their personal stories. They were all suffering horribly, but I also saw resilience in them, that they wouldn't give up. And, I see that today in people from Ukraine. I see it in people here in Israel. And there's always a side that won't give up. But it made me start feeling guilty when I would leave. And in 1993, I was there for about 7 months. And so their conflict, their pain became mine. I started owning that. And it started bothering me in a way that I didn't know how to deal with. And when I first realized it is when I would get in an airplane and the door would close. I would just break down and start crying. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what was triggering it. But later I would find out that I was having what they now call PTSD. I sort of ignored all of those things. But those symptoms, and the things that happened in Rwanda, put me like a gerbil in a wheel. Like I needed to get to the next thing really quick, because that's how I would deal with the last thing, is go to the next thing. And so anyway, that's a little bit about Bosnia.
Well, if you move on to the next thing and then you don't have to deal, you don't have to sit in the quiet. That's why, I talk to a lot of men and I'm probably in this category as well. There's never silence around me, right? I constantly have something going on because it's my job, right? So, no, I got to read this book and I got to listen to this podcast and I got to watch this video and I got to stay up on the news and I got to whatever. And then the moment my head hits the pillow, it's just all the same stuff. My body's just not moving. And so that's the only piece that I get to really reflect and see what exactly is going on. But you mentioned Rwanda. Obviously, you talked about Rwanda in the book. And really, the only historical context that most people have that are probably listening to this podcast about what happened in Rwanda in the early 90s is the movie Hotel Rwanda, right? And so obviously that's a Hollywood movie. It's got some things that have been, they're very fantastical. There are things that certainly didn't happen. There's a description of things that did happen. But then there's the reality of what happened on the ground. And so the genocide from 1993 to 1994, in the book, I think you even said, hey, I'm going to be giving kind of PG or PG-13 versions of the stories. But as I mentioned off air, this is not a PG-13 audience. This is a man's audience, and these are men that have seen a lot of darkness, and some men that are, open to being exposed to it to really understand what capital E evil is in this world. And so I guess just like with Bosnia, if you could give us an overview of what was going on in Rwanda before the genocide happened, what was happening while that was going on, and then your work there on the ground.
So on April the 6th of 1994, an airplane was shot down in Kigali, and it had the president of Rwanda and of Burundi in it, and that launched a war. Nobody to this day clearly knows who shot that plane down, but what they do know is that the president of Rwanda had organized something called the Interahamwe, which I think is a Rwandan word for togetherness or something. But it turned out to be like a killing club. And the Interahamwe had been trained to kill all of the Tutsis, which were the minority tribe in Rwanda. And if there were political moderates that were in their own tribe, the Hutus, they would kill them also. Well, how could they kill so many people? How would they know? They had divided their society down in a communist-like structure of every 10 houses had a leader. And that leader knew those 10 families, and he knew the names of everybody in them, and he would have a meeting with them every week or every month. And later, when the killing started, after that plane crash on April the 6th, it was in 1994, they would have meetings every day, and they identified every Tutsi, and they would kill them. And there were thousands of people being murdered. And it was, front page news. It was on the magazines. The demons of hell have been loosed. There are no demons in hell. They've all been released in Rwanda. That was a headline of Newsweek or Time. And so I wondered, what we could do. We sent a couple guys over, and along with myself, and we went down and to Tanzania. There were about 200,000 people in the field, refugees that had come across the bridge. And I wanted to know what was going on. And I have to tell you, when I walked through that camp where those 200,000 people were, I felt something that I was very uncomfortable with, and I couldn't exactly articulate it. But it was evil. I was feeling evil. And later, when I would come to understand what it was and what it felt like, I went to the bridge where the people came across, and there was a big pile of weapons, they weren't weapons, they were farming tools. They were machetes and hoes and like single-pointed little plows. The Tanzanians had made them throw all of their weapons down because that was the tools that they had been using to kill people. I convinced a Tanzanian soldier to let me go out on this bridge. It might be 300 or 400 feet long. And he told me I could go halfway. And I went, and I looked down in Rusumo Falls where the waterfalls are. And there were bodies, hundreds of bodies everywhere. And they were coming over the waterfall. And they had like rubber doll kind of, it almost looked surreal where they had swollen and decayed. And a lot of them had been mangled, and, heads were gone and limbs were gone. Smell of it with the mist in the air, it was putrid, and it was horrible. It was just a horrible, horrible scene. And But I knew just by looking at my watch and counting the bodies coming down the same way that I would look at water coming through a pipe and catch it in a bucket, and I could tell you how many gallons a minute. I made calculations of how many people a day were being killed or how many people an hour were being killed. And so I told the Tanzanian guy, I said, do you see those men over there in Rwanda on the other side of the bridge? He said, yeah. I said, I want to go talk to him. And he sort of came to arms and he said, no, I won't let you do that. And I said, listen, my friends are here. My truck's over there. I'm going to walk over there, and I don't think you're going to shoot me. And I was actually brazen in the way that I said it, and I just turned my back on him and walked. And he didn't shoot. And I got over to the other two guys, and they wore red berets, and they sort of had silver jewelry on. And they were like, I called them disco boys. They just looked like disco kids. And they didn't speak English. I spoke a little bit of French. But I ended up writing a letter in English and said that Samaritan's Purse, Christian organization, we wanted to come in and we wanted to help 90 days, 10,000 people. I gave a letter to the guy and he told me, vous retournez ici après 2 jours. You return here after 2 days. And so I went away. I came back in 2 days and he told me they're waiting for you in Malindi. We went to Uganda. We drove down to Uganda, and we found a taxi driver in Uganda who said he would take us into Rwanda. When I went into Rwanda, there was no sound. And this is an important fact. I was just talking with a friend right before this podcast about this issue. Where evil is released, you don't hear dogs, you don't hear crickets, you don't hear anything. Not like this, and not when it's been released like this. And there were people had been murdered everywhere in Rwanda. I went to this small mud shack in the village where they told me to go to, and there was a woman there by the name of Christine, and she was trying to be the humanitarian coordinator. And she had nothing there to work with, really. And there were some people in the shack, and there was one guy that stood out to me, an American guy, and he told her, he's fidgety and everything. We're just sitting by the wall. Jim Harrelson, a friend, was with me, and he runs Operation Christmas Child. Some of your people may have heard of Operation Christmas Child, but anyway, it wasn't a thing then. And this American guy, he says, I've been here 2 hours. Don't you care about your people? I'm trying to save lives. And that woman, Christine, lowered her voice down to a whisper where you could barely hear her. And she said, where were you for the last 20 years? So there had been a conflict going on for 20 years. The Tutsis went up into Uganda. That's why they spoke English, because that's the language in Uganda. The Hutus spoke French. These killings were horrific. She took us out to a place called Rutari. There were maybe 10 or 12,000 people. It was in a deep ravine coming up on the hilltops. And we thought, yeah, we could help these people. But we didn't know, Kyle, that in the next 2 weeks, that population would explode to 125,000 people. And God had put us in the right place, and we were able to help those people. But in July 1994, the shelling down in Kigali stopped. We were up on the mountains. I could hear the shelling. We stopped, and I decided I'm going into the capital. I want to see what's going on. And there was still fighting, random fighting. It wasn't heavy, and there was troop movement. But there were bodies everywhere. There were piles of bodies and pieces of bodies, and most of the killing had been done with machetes. And that's what I remember. We found the hospital, the central hospital of Kigali, and the Belgian Red Cross guy that was there that had stayed through it. He was a little crazy. He said, this hospital, you can open this hospital. And we went there, and it was full of dead people. They had been murdered. Their throats had been slit. Their heads were cut off. They were rotten in the morgue. They were putrid, and we started cleaning all that out. And there was the sewage line backed up. We got a backhoe out there, and we found out later 6,000 people were buried there. And so we cleaned it up, moved the bodies out, started interviewing people, reopened the Central Hospital of Kigali, and every single person, everybody, there was like a brotherhood of pain, not just in my team, but in the survivors themselves. There was, I can't describe that kind of pain. I don't know how to relate to it, but I'll tell you a story. I wrote about it in the book that this woman told. She had 7 kids, and her husband disappeared when the killing started. She assumed that he was dead. And the guy that was the leader of the 10-unit group called a meeting and had her pick out one of her children and dig the grave, and he put the child in the grave and forced the mother, at the risk of the other children, to bury her own child alive. And he went through it every week until she had buried all 7 of her children. Then he took her as his wife. She became pregnant. The killing ended around the 90 days, from April 6, May 6, June 6 to July 6. And then it was wipe up military operations. Her husband pops back up, and she's pregnant with this guy that raped her. I don't know how they did it, but they reconciled. They had lost all 7 of their children. The mom was the one that had been forced to do that. And she had nothing left in her life, nothing. I don't know. That's a story with no end. There's no fix to that story. There's no happy ending to that story. I remember hiring 2 ladies, and they needed a ride. Me and another guy took them to this area in Kigali, which was abandoned. It had like 500,000 people in it. I bet there weren't 1,000 people. People were looting everywhere. There were piles of bodies everywhere. We took this lady, she needed to go somewhere to get something, and there were piles of bodies there, and dogs are eating the bones. They're burning bodies. It was such a killing area. I've never seen anything like it. The house that we finally took over with the permission of the authorities, there were 2 big German shepherds there. And I worked with this big Hawaiian guy, Dwayne, I love him. He's a big guy, but he had the most tender heart. And one dog was salivating heavily. And I thought it might be rabid. Beautiful German shepherd, but mangy looking because it hadn't had any attention in 3 months. And I tied it to a tree just to watch it, to observe it. Dwayne, big tender-hearted Dwayne, puts on 2 pair of medical gloves and goes out and pets that dog and ran his hand down in the dog's throat. And the dog's gagging, and Dwayne's being gentle. And he latches on and he works something out. It's a human rib bone that the dog was choked on. And the dog gave like a cough, and the dog was good. Dwayne saved that dog's life, because I'd have shot that dog. I thought the dog had rabies. And, when we found this house, there was a big pile of brush on the back porch. It was a big pile of brush. And there wasn't anybody there. I got permission from a military commander, a woman named Major Rose. They gave me permission to have the house. So we started carrying the brush away. There were the remnants of 21 dead people under there that they had slaughtered. The blood was everywhere. You see things like fat in the concrete and the dissolved bodies, and the blood has run off in the grout between the tile, and it crawls up the walls, and you can't get rid of the smell, even if you take a big chlorine pill like you would put in a swimming pool, crush it up into powder, put it in 5 gallons of water, and you pour it on the concrete, and again, and you do it again, and you do it again for 2 weeks, and you still can't get the smell out. We did the best that we could. We cleaned it up. We had a mass grave down in the front yard. They were dark days. Dark days. But, you know, God did things there that I will never know. And I went back to Rwanda in 2018. We kept a presence there until 1999 or 2000, in that area. We saw a lot of healing happen. One of the greatest stories of healing, there's a guy that works for us at Samaritan's Purse, and his whole family was killed. And his wife, when my wife was dying, his wife was a nurse, and she came and helped. So I got to know Alex well. Anyway, he went back to Rwanda, and he didn't want to carry the weight anymore. And he went to the killers of his family, and he forgave them. And you look at that country now, it's a beautiful country. When you go there, you hear dogs barking, you hear crickets, and you hear birds. But when evil is loose on the land, it's not an imaginary thing that all forms of life sense it, and they just go silent.
Ken, I'm first of all, just thank you for sharing all that, because there's obviously a level of vulnerability that you have to lean into to even share some of those things. And, you know, before we get out of here, I want to talk about Zaire. I want to talk about, you know, Africa current day, but I'm just curious for you as a believer. You know, most Christians don't really see suffering, right? They might see the suffering of a dying family member, or, you know, a sick pet, or the suffering of a brokenhearted child after a breakup, you know, that kind of level of suffering. This is almost indescribable. Now, if you're a student of history, and if you're a student of, you know, how brutal the world was before it was quote unquote civilized, post-enlightenment, if you will, that's just kind of old hat. You know, I read about a recent, you know, it was a Roman battle. I can't remember the name of the battle, but there were like 60,000 Romans that were slaughtered by Hannibal and his army in one day on one field. And they were all basically stabbed to death or slashed to death with, you know, swords and spears and things like that. But in our modern day, those things just don't really compute, Ken. It's almost like people have this thing that has been inserted into their brain to be like, that can't be real. That can't be possible. Like, that's just some, you know, fantastical story. But you were there, you saw it, you smelled it. How do you continue to do the work that you do? Because we're all about trying to equip men, you know, to push back darkness by providing content that helps them be spiritually, mentally, and physically resilient. You can't do the work that you're talking about without some level of resilience, courage, toughness, grit, you know, whatever you want to call it. But I'm just sitting here as you're telling me these stories. It's like, how do you make it to the next hour, much less the next city?
The adjustment in seeing something like that, unleashed evil. It's unleashed evil. And you know, killings have happened throughout history, as you just said. You talked about a battle where Hannibal killed 60,000 men or something, the Romans. But I didn't live that. I lived there. I was in Rwanda. I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. I know what I sensed. And it was the darkness. I wish that I could say, the Lord is my strength. And that's true. He carried me through that, but there was fear, there was anger, there was pain, and there was something else that sticks with you that I can't describe, but it does something inside of you. It levels the total playing field about good guys and bad guys. Like, when you turn your Apple computer on, you have a default screen that comes on. I don't know what you got yours set to, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
If you turn man on without light, man goes to darkness. And I've seen that over and over. The default condition of mankind without God in your heart is evil. It's darkness. And there is no bottom of the pit that man can go to in pursuing that darkness. And I have had the opportunity to see the results of that on several occasions. The way that I've dealt with it has not been the best way to deal with it. I became withdrawn. I became quarrelsome. I became with suppressed anger all the time. I became, if God had not given me a good woman to help me, to sort of be a natural counselor, I don't think I would have gotten through that time. I could have been a totally different person right now. But it wasn't easy. I found out later there's something called critical incident stress management, and I'm sort of a logical thinker. But CISM, C-I-S-M, this is the way that my 50,000-foot view of it. Kyle, tell me the facts of what you saw, what happened to you. Kyle, how do you feel about what you experienced? Kyle, what are you going to do now? And later, I was through some training and an incident that happened in 1996. You mentioned it in Congo or in Zaire. And if I think about it along those ways, I find it helps me process it. And probably 90% of everybody that sees anything is going to be able to deal with it, but they need to be able to process it. And you've heard the story that guys coming back from World War II, they're together on the ship for 6 weeks as they get back or whatever. Yep. And they came back healthier. They decompress because they got colleagues to decompress to. I went through a CISM training course at Ground Zero. And the lady, she was from Washington, Seattle. Her name was Teresa. She said something that stuck in my mind. Policemen talk to policemen and firemen talk to firemen. And I realized I am never going to tell anybody what I've seen except somebody that can relate to it the way that I relate to it. Even, talking to you now is difficult. But what I started doing was trying to build resiliency within the department of colleagues that I work with that go out in the world and do this kind of stuff and see this. And there was, so now we have a staff care program. We're very deliberate and intentional. We debrief people because we're just helping them process it. And that processing, I think, is what God gives us. It's the best way to deal with something. If you're not well mentally, you're not going to be strong spiritually. And for Christians just to say you need to read the Bible more, okay, well, that's good, Mr. Dentist, Mr. Attorney. But you weren't there. You didn't see it. You didn't hear it. You didn't smell it. You didn't talk to those people. You're speaking academically. I'm dealing with it realistically. So understanding those things, I think, are helpful and have been, they've gotten me through it. So in the end, I can say God's carried me through it, but there was pain in the journey.
Well, Ken, there's also a certain level of equipping, because when you talk to a parent that has lost a child and they try to describe what that's like, it's like trying to describe color to blind people that have always been blind. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. The best I can do as a man who has not lost a child is to do my absolute level best to empathize or sympathize, right? Which are not the same thing, but to do my best to come at it from those two angles. Because I'll never understand unless it happens to me. But that person is equipped in a unique way to do ministry to other people that have gone through that or are in the process of still going through that. I guess you never actually get to the other side of that process. But it's in that pain, it's what Satan meant for evil that God will use for his glory and his good, because you are being uniquely exposed as an individual to a level of darkness that is not reserved for you because you have not experienced darkness that has never been experienced before. It's just the only time you've experienced it. And so, Ken, in a macro level, you're experiencing these things so that you can do your ministry more effectively. Guys listening to this right now, the hurt, the pain you're suffering. And for some of you, the worst thing that's ever happened is you lost your job. Or maybe you were on the bad side of an affair or an adultery. Maybe you're on the bad side of a murder or a crime. Maybe you were violated sexually or emotionally by someone at some point in your life. That is not a defining moment for you in the negative. It's actually a defining moment for you because it can be used as a positive, because we get to look forward to a time period, Ken, where every tear that ever was shed will be as if it never existed, right? And I guess that's the one comforting thing when you're dealing with that level of evil, is knowing that we actually win in the end, and that basically the memory of that sin and that depravity will be no more. We're kind of going a little bit over time here, but I do want to get to a couple of more things. Well, let me ask you, do you want to talk about your detainment and interrogation in Zaire in the mid-90s, or do you want people to just read it in the book? Because I got more questions.
You know what? I want them to read it in the book, and I'm willing to talk about it if that's what you want to talk about.
Well, tell you what, we'll just do a couple more things, but if you can just give a little bit of an overview, because it's just from the outset, looking at it, you're like, wait a minute, hold up. You were detained and interrogated in Zaire. And this, it's easy to talk to you now because obviously you made it out. But while you're experiencing that, you're like, I don't know if I'm going to leave here with my head. So yeah, I think that's worth talking about.
So it was 1996. I was in Rwanda, and we had something that people don't know so much about right now, shortwave radios. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have fax machines. Yeah. And so I'm sitting in the radio room, and this guy puts out a call, and his name was Jim Lindquist, and he was calling from a place named Kashungu in Zaire. And I've never met this man to this day. And he said he had over 60,000 refugees had come in, and they needed medicine. They were sick. So I said, all right, we'll try to help you. I had our airplane loaded with medicine in Nairobi. I got my passport and the passport of two other guys, went down to the Zairean embassy right there in Rwanda, and I applied for the visas, paid a $100 expediting fee, and came back the next morning, got it. The airplane came in. Me and another guy, Mike Van Rooyen, get in the airplane with a pilot, Curtis Wilkerson. We fly to this place called Bunia, B-U-N-I-A, in northeastern Zaire. We land there about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a grass strip. And a guy comes out, he's screaming at us in French, wanted to know, what are you doing here? Why did you come? You don't have permission. We showed him the visas. He took our passports, and he said, that's $100 fine each. So I give him $300. And he said, come back here in the morning and we'll sort this out. I didn't know what he was angry about. We go out to the mission base at a hospital called Nyankundi. It's a 10-minute flight away. Next morning at 6 o'clock, 6:30, there's a dozen guys coming looking for me, James ISAACS, with guns, the soldiers. And they arrested me, they arrested Mike, and they arrested Curtis. They took us down to the hangar, and for 11 and a half hours, we were interrogated individually. And they would write their questions down in Lingala, their local language. They would translate it into French, and this young guy there would translate it into English and ask us. And so they're going through all this dialogue. It was a bad situation. It wasn't good. And I thought, this is going to go violent here. I can see being beat, and I see blood and urine here coming out on the floor. And that didn't happen. They interrogated us. And then the next morning, they put us in our own airplane and had us fly them to Bunia, and they put us in a house, locked us in. Mission director's house, Ian Campbell was his name. And they said we were spies. They accused us of bringing in poison medicine, even though they set the medicine off and left it at the mission hospital. And what we had missed was that the day that we flew, Rwanda launched a war against Zaire, where they had 2.3 million people in refugee camps further south in a place called Goma. And we just happened to come in. It was like bad timing, real bad timing. And they saw a stamp in my passport that they associated with some American activity in Uganda. And they said, "You're a spy." So they gave us a lunch break during the interrogation. I'm a skydiver. I've got a few hundred jumps. And I saw a guy had wings on him. And I thought I'd go out and talk shop with the boy because I've done skydiving. And I said, "Oh, I'm a skydiver too." And in my schoolboy French. And I thought we had made a bond there and maybe he'd be a little bit nicer, but he went back inside and told him that clearly I was a spy or a special forces guy because I was a skydiver too. And, there was about a 3-day period where I was drawing all of my strength totally from the book of Isaiah. And we didn't think we were going to make it. And in the margin of my Bible is still written to this day, that my travel Bible, "Will I die tonight or tomorrow?" And I felt like our death was very imminent. And but as it turns out, a doctor friend, an ophthalmologist, Dr. Tony Uketi, he's a man, he's jet black skin, beautiful man, I love him. He came in one day, and he wasn't jet black, and he wasn't smiling. He was gray. He looked like he'd had a heart attack. And I said, "Tony, what's wrong with you?" He said, "They've notified their general officers in Kisangani that they've got 3 Americans here with an airplane." He said, "We've got to get you out of here." He said, "When the soldiers get here, they will kill you." And so it became sort of desperate. We got out, bought our way out. Ironic part of the story is this. I'm standing at the plane side. This guy that had led the interrogations come up, short guy, never spoke a word of English. He says, "Hey, Mr. Ken, how do you like Zaire?" I said, "Well, I like Zaire fine." I said, "I love the people here. It's beautiful." He said, "That's good." And I said, "I want to congratulate you on your professionalism during the interrogation." And he said, "Thank you. Your CIA taught me." And I said, "Well, and you speak English too?" And he said, "Yes." And so he said, "I want to come and visit your country." So I took one of my business cards down and I wrote down every phone number of everybody that I could think. And I thought, "Yeah, you come to Charlotte, North Carolina, buddy, I'm going to make arrangements for you." Yeah. And I gave him that card. And he asked me, he said, "You see the brown man over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you take him out? He's an Egyptian military advisor. They'll kill him when they get here." And I said, "No, it's against policy. I'm not allowed to take anybody except staff." He said, "Please, Mr. Ken, he's a father." So I said, it was like surreal, Kyle. It was unbelievable. The shift in the power. Like I'm under this guy's thumb for a week, and now he's begging me to take some dude out from Egypt. And I said, "All right, it'll be $200. He reaches in his pocket and he pulls out 2 crisp $100 bills that I had just used to buy my way. I gave me $200 back. We took that man out, dropped him off in Uganda. And in 2018, an ambassador, this happened in 1996. In 2018, I'm in Addis Ababa and I meet the ambassador from Egypt. And he said, "My country owes you a debt of gratitude." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because in 1996, you took an Egyptian military advisor out and his daughters are grown. He's grandpa. And you say," wow. and I was totally floored. I was weeping with I was just so surprised. Plus, I was sort of amazed that they had tracked that intelligence all that year and had connected it right back to me. But, something that happened that ties into what we were talking about. When I got back to Nairobi, we were all high-fiving it. We got out. We were that close to death. And two guys came to see me, Jim Strite and Lauren Fast in Nairobi. They were missionaries. And they came in. Lauren sat right here, and Jim sat right here. They're like, "In my space. Like, you're creeping me out, man. Why are you in my space?" I didn't know it, but they started asking me these questions. "Tell us what happened." how do you feel about what happened? What are you going to do now? That conversation went on for about 2 hours. And when they left, I clearly and distinctly remember feeling better. They had had training in critical incident stress management, and I never knew it until I was at Ground Zero in 2001. And about 5 years ago, I was in Nairobi, and I ran into Lauren Fast in a mall. And I had the distinct privilege of walking up to him and saying, Lauren, you came to see me in November of 96, and you sat down and you talked to me after I was arrested. Do you remember that? And he said, yeah. I said, you had critical incident stress management. I want you to know that you helped me by being there. So having a tool is good, but I'll tell you what else is being a good is just being present. You know, when you've had somebody in your family die before, I'm sure we all have. People tend not to want to ask you about it. But yet, if somebody says, oh, so Kyle, your loved one died, I'm so sorry. Tell me what happened. Actually, people want to talk about it. But most of us are afraid to ask about it. And it's the same way after something like that is traumatic. And I know that when I would be away in a war zone or in a area where I've seen horrible things, when I come back, the average person in my hometown would come up and say, oh, how are things in Rwanda? Have they stopped killing each other yet?
Yeah.
And you get, I call it the 15-second CNN window to make a statement, and that's it. And okay, it's good to see you, man. I'm glad you're looking good. Really what I could use is just somebody to be there with me. They don't have to say anything, because in time, I'll start talking. And so, you know, I would encourage all of your listeners, don't be afraid. You use the word sympathy and empathy. The difference being empathy is you've had it. Sympathy is you're sympathizing with. Be there and show those kind of emotions, because I think, you know, when I've lost loved ones, whether it was my mother, my father, my wife, I appreciate it when people come up and say, how are you doing? And they actually want to sit down and talk with me, and they'll spend 20 or 30 minutes or, you know, whatever talking to me. I appreciate that a whole lot more than I do the pat on the back and the 20-second glib remark, and then they move on.
Well, and Ken, I think as well, you can be present without being in someone's presence, because your presence is a present. But I think about it this way. There's a buddy of mine whose dad died suddenly years ago. I've got a reminder in my calendar every year on that day where I will text him to say, hey, brother, I know today could be hard for you. It's a fairly macabre anniversary. Just letting you know I love you, thinking about you, praying for you today. What does that take?
That is priceless.
Yeah.
That is priceless.
And guys, like, you don't even have to plug it in your phone with your thumbs. Most of us have like a voice thing that we can say, hey, set a reminder for every year on this date to you know, message, you know, Tom or Jim or whoever. Like, you can do that, and you can just let someone know, I'm with you. You've got a bar on your shoulders, and I'm just going to get up under one side and help you lift a little bit of that weight off. Ken, I want to read a quote here from the conclusion of your book and then ask you one last question. I'm certainly no prophet. I am not a preacher, but I can testify that the cadence, the rhythm, the speed of the fulfillment of prophecy certainly appears to be picking up in my lifetime. Simply take a look at the pace of technology and changes of recent years. Around the world, deviousness, brutality, and savagery, the increase of wickedness is clear. With the way information is given or withheld, the way the power is centralized in governments, and even the concentration of power and authority that exceeds governments, how much longer can the world continue on this trajectory? In the meantime, Jesus told us what to do: stand firm for the gospel of his kingdom. So I can say yes and amen to that. And the one thing I would add, because this leads to okay, well, what's next for Ken? What's next for Samaritan's Purse? Ken, I've been talking about the fact that Christians in Africa have been beheaded and sought out for destruction for years now. But here we are recording this in November of 2025, and all of a sudden, everybody is now aware of, oh, wait a minute, tens of thousands of Nigerian Christians are being slaughtered by Muslim Islamists in the name of their false prophet Muhammad and their false god Allah. Wait, what? And then you have President Trump coming out and saying that, hey, they better knock it off or we're going to end it. and you're not going to like the way that we're doing it. I think his exact words was, we'll go in guns blazing, right? And so again, with Trump, you never know how serious he is, but you have to take him serious at the same time. So for you and the work that you're doing, and it's not just Nigeria, it's Mozambique, it's Sudan. There are specifically Christians that are being slaughtered specifically by Muslims simply for the fact that they are Christians. And so what is Samaritan's Purse's role with that? What is your role with what is currently going on and is continuing to go on in Africa?
Well, it's Africa, but it's other countries
Sure.
as well, I can tell you. It's a deep question. It's deeply frustrating because there's not a clear answer. And there are going to be martyrs. There are going to be people that are killed for their faith. Jesus told us, they hate me, they're going to hate you more. And but we still are called to stand up for our brothers, and I think that we're called to try to protect them and preserve life. The situation in Nigeria is very complicated because you have a functioning government and you have functioning state governments. You have a standing army. You have standing police forces. So why isn't the government protecting its own citizens against other of its citizens? And I don't know the answer to it, but I am thrilled to hear President Trump bring some attention to it. I don't know, gun blazing, I don't know what's going on with that. But, and I don't, like you said, I don't know where he'll actually take his action point. But calling it out is a good thing. And it is something, one thing I can tell you right now, there is a man named Mark Walker, and he is the nominee for the ambassador at large for religious freedom in the State Department. The fact that, we're 11 months in to a presidency and they've not been able to confirm somebody. Mr. Walker, who used to be a congressman in North Carolina, that's how I know about him, he cares about protection of Christians and religious freedom. And, all religions need to be free. If they're not all free, Christianity won't be either. And we're not taught in the Bible to live under a Christian theocracy. We have free choice, right? Mm-hmm. And but it is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. I have seen, particularly in Sudan, I've seen it in South Sudan, I've seen it in Congo, I've seen it in Uganda, I've seen it in Nigeria, I've seen it in Syria, where in July there were massacres of Christians and Druze in the southern part of Syria. And in 2 Timothy chapter 3, I think verses 5 through 7, I don't always remember the address as well, but you could check that out. It says that in those last days, people will become boastful and lovers of themselves, always seeking knowledge, but never acknowledging truth. And that one verse has always stuck with me from when I was a young Christian, 13, 14 years old. What does that mean? But now with telephone technology and electronic data and the way that we communicate, people are always seeking knowledge, but they don't acknowledge the truth. And the truth is Jesus Christ. That's the truth. But they're blind to that. They can't see that. And horrible things in the world happen. I think of the religious suppression and the brutality that is going on in China right now, in Myanmar. We put a hospital up there in February and March after that earthquake. And we wanted to work with the churches. The churches are not free there. They live with persecution all the time. And that kind of persecution, whether we like it in human terms or not, makes the body of Christ stronger. And I'm not, but I'm just saying I'm not being an advocate for killing Christians, don't get me wrong, but they will not be able to kill us. And we know who the ultimate victor is, and we know what the truth is. And, but we still need to shed light when these atrocities happen. And so I applaud President Trump for doing that. And I hope our Congress, our Senate will confirm our ambassador at large on this issue.
I hope so as well. So, Ken, I mean, we've weaved in and out of a lot of different things here. It's such a powerful conversation today, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Well, it's been a joy to be with you, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed talking, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to sort of sashay myself down memory lane there on some things that are a little tough to talk about. But I appreciate it, and I appreciate your ministry, your show. So thank you so much.
Ken, thanks again. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Ken ISAACS. But before I let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So in the show notes, I've got a link to where you can buy your copy of Running to the Fire and a link to where you can support Samaritan's Purse. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.